We're shaking, people. Back with another reaction, back with some more J-drama score. Well, I should say, though, J-drama soundtrack. I mentioned before, I'm going to react to a tune from the Kuro Coach, or in Japanese, Kurokochi, which is actually the name of the character, drama. It's a drama about an unsolved crime, a real unsolved crime in Japanese history. Took place on December 10th, 1968. 300 million yen were stolen by a young police officer. And I forgot, there's a layer that I forgot to explain. In the real history of it, it remains unsolved, but shortly after the event, the stealing of the money, there was a police officer's son who was like 19, and for whatever reason, he came under suspicion that maybe he was the one who pretended to be an officer and stole the money. And this son eventually committed suicide through potassium cyanide. Now, some people took that to mean that he must have been responsible, but no direct evidence was ever provided. So in the show, I mentioned, the show is like a speculation, a hypothesis, like what if this is what really happened? And one of the layers in it is, what if that son of a police officer, which they kind of run with, what if he did do it but didn't really commit suicide, but the public or the police announced that that's what happened as a way to minimize the sort of reputational damage of both, Japanese institutions like banking institutions, but also the police. If you can't solve a crime, what does that say about how safe residents should feel, and so on. So this show kind of runs with that. Like, what if there was a guy who, was in that kind of situation, was the son of a police officer and did do it, but didn't commit suicide, and so on. So I mentioned before, the lead character played by Nagase Tomoya, the lead singer Tokyo, shown here in the middle, along with one of my favorite actresses, Goreki Ayame and Atsuro Watabe, who are both in a show called Angels and Demons, although they played very different roles here, although her role is similar, but it plays out differently. Regardless, this is, years later. I think it shows from 2013. I think it's supposed to take place basically in that year. So we're looking at a crime that was, like more tn 30 years, like 40 years in the past. And the point is, the lead detective, Kurokochi, he bends rules, he breaks laws, he bribes people, he blackmails people, but it's all in an attempt to sort of bring to light injustices that not only happened back then, but also happened in the past, but more recently. He used to date a woman who was looking into these things, and she was eventually killed, so he's trying to figure out what happened to her. And so the show keeps saying, who's right, who's wrong. There are actions that maybe in the moment are unjust in one way, but are driving at justice in another context. And he keeps asking his younger and more inexperienced partner, like, look, you don't have to follow me. I'm going to keep doing what I do. And maybe by the end, you'll see that some of this is justified. And indeed, the tune we're going to listen to from the soundtrack, it's called Start the Revolution. It's the second tune, and I mentioned before, this soundtrack is done by two different people, and we're going to listen to a track by the other person, which is to say the first track I reacted to, called Jupiter, a reconfiguration of Gustav Holst's Jupiter, the Bringer of Jollity. That was done by Habuka Yuri, who does the second half of the soundtrack. But the first half is done by Dewa Yoshiaki, and he is not only a composer and arranger, but he's also a guitarist. And indeed, the first half of this soundtrack has a very, instrumental rock soundtrack. There's not really lyrics in the songs, but they're all kind of like cinematic rock instrumental tunes. And I think that's because, again, the composer is a guitarist by trade, or at least one of his sort of musical outlets. And so this tune, Start the Revolution, it's another one that's played in a lot of circumstances that are similar over the course of the show. The circumstance in particular that you hear it in is when the genius and indeed the morality of what Kurokochi is doing sort of comes to light for his partner, Goreki Ayame's character. Because basically, he'll do something where it looks like, he's, like he shouldn't be doing that, and he's bribing someone who's, they're also in the police, and what's happening, and whatever. And then by the end of the episode, she'll come to see that, like, oh, wow, like, so he actually did root out some wrongdoers and also put pressure on this criminal, because the whole time, the people who were involved in the original conspiracy, and then, over the years, other generations inherited the legacy of that conspiracy, and even those people who weren't alive when the original thing happened or who were just kids, they have a vested interest in not to let the truth get out. And so he's constantly fighting against that and Kurokochi, through his maneuverings, can sort of put some of those people in situations where they're not able to act or where their malfeasance has been exposed. So this track often plays when the genius and the guile of Kurokochi has come to the fore, and his younger partner realizes, oh, like, you know, maybe he's doing things not fully on the level, but I see the logic of what he's doing. So let's get to it. This is from the Kurokochi, or also called Kuro Coach soundtrack. This is a tune called Start the Revolution by one of the two series composers, Dewa Yoshiaki. Here she'll be like, oh, Kurokochi, you son of a bitch. Like this turnover part where it sounds like the engine of the track has to like turn over multiple times. It's coming. But again, it's like cinematic instrumental rock music, right? You got your strings up top. Electric, almost like fax alert sound. Oh yes. A bit more epic, a bit more atmospheric. Some piano. Love that part. Often kind of like late, there'll be like a montage where that's playing, or like the end of a scene where again Kurokochi, like what he's done and the like cleverness of it becomes clear. And then like it'll sometimes layer that last part over like the final epilogue scene where maybe some new thing will come up and like, oh wow, and that's how the episode ends. That near 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 near, it'll sometimes like layer over the final like non-music dialogue scene, which again usually like ends the episode in a dramatic way that makes you like, oh gosh, I gotta see what happens next. So yeah, top tune. Shout out to, I want to make sure I get it right again, Dewa Yoshiaki. Love the guitar playing. When I first started watching this show, I wondered if the guitar-based soundtrack, which again I think is mostly Dewa Yoshiaki's part of the soundtrack, I wondered if it was Tokyo, because I was like, you know, the main actor, Nagase Tomoya, he's the lead singer of Tokyo, and they have done theme songs for shows that he's acted in, but as it turns out, no, it's a composer and an arranger who is himself a guitarist. So love that. Shout out to him, shout out to the show, really do enjoy it. It's about a real crime, and it's like a, you know, hypothetical fiction. It's, you know, stylized. I love all the performers in it. So once again, big up to the show as well. Do let me know what you think of the tune. I will see you next time.